All right. Top of the day to you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from every part of the world that you are contributing to this great symposium. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to extend a warm welcome to the guests. And I can assure you that in 1 hour, 30 minutes, we should be over with this. Let me start by having a brief, give a brief background on Alafarika, the organizer of this symposium. Alafarika was first conceived in 2012 as a research initiative and was later registered in Nigeria as a research and consultancy company to publish books, studies, and carry out training in research, academic, management, and administrative fields. Its digital platforms provide training, materials, and publications, including books, research papers, and articles on Africa in different fields, and include politics, economy, social development, education, and leadership. Once again, on behalf of the organizers of this online African symposium on knowledge creation and dissemination in Africa, I want to say you're welcome. Now, we're going to start, moving straight to the first, we're going to start by, I will read out the profiles of all the speakers so that the people that will watch thereafter will be able to have insight into the speakers. I will start with, I hope I'm not going to murder this name. I've been trying to ensure I don't murder this pronunciation. Please, if I do, kindly pardon me. Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Mr. Zayed, I'm not sure you can hear me. I guess he's having challenges with his internet.
I can hear you clearly. It's good.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Then I can continue. I have tried to give a brief background on Alafarika, the organizers of this online Africa symposium titled Knowledge Creation and Dissemination in Africa. And I'll be going straight to read out the profiles of the speakers so that the people that are going to watch will understand, will have insight into the quality of the speakers. And I'll start with this name. I don't want to murder it, and please, if I do, kindly pardon me. I'll start with Mr. Zayed el Nabolsy.
Perfect.
Zayed el Nabolsy is a PhD candidate in Africana Studies at Cornell University. He has an MA in philosophy and a B engineering in chemical engineering from McMaster University. He has published on the history of classical German philosophy, Amica Cabral's philosophy of culture, Aristotle Pauline Ontology's theory of scientific dependency, debates about a theory of imperialism in East African Marxism, and philosophy of education from the standpoint of participatory action research, amongst other topics. He is currently working on a dissertation entitled Science, Modernity, and Progress in 19th Century West and North Africa, a comparative study of Africanus, Otton, and Rifal al-Tatawi. The title of his presentation is Philosophy and Human Development, the African Context. Once again, Mr. Zayed el Nabolsy, you are welcome. I'll go straight to the profile of Mr. Akinpelu. Mr. Yusuf Akinpelu is a data journalist who currently works with the BBC Africa Visual Journalism team, coordinating 6 West African languages services: English, French, Pidgin, Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba, to produce and publish digital and multimedia data journalism contents. Before that, he headed Premium Times Data Desk, leading a team that breathed life into data and made data easily understandable. With dozens of awards under his belt, this year he won the Sanlam African Growth Program and was crowned the 2021 Sanlam Financial Journalist of the Year, becoming the first non-South African to win the much coveted silverware. We'll be talking on investigative and data journalism, unraveling the landmines for Africa's knowledge-driven prosperity. Mr. Akinpelu, you are welcome. My name is Anu Adesemoye. I'm the moderator of this symposium and also a speaker. And I am a film and media studies research student with University of Malaysia. And I've been teaching journalism and communication for like 20 years. And I love Africa. And I love everything about Africa. And I shall be talking on Amnesia, Anamnesis, and Nemesis of Uprising without the requisite knowledge in Africa, the Nigerian experience. Once again, you're welcome. Kindly note, for each speaker, there are 3 interrogative questions to drive our presentations. So what I'll do is I'll ask the question as it relates to your topic. Then once you deliver your presentation, I will allow the next person to do his too, in that order. So I won't ask all the 3 questions at once, so that it can be interactive. I hope we are on the same page. Are we on the same page?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Now I'll start with the first speaker. That is in person of Mr. Zayed el Nabolsy. The first question says, how can African philosophy help us understand the problems facing knowledge creation on the African continent? I'll take that again. How can African philosophy help us understand the problems facing knowledge creation on the African continent? You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting this event, and thank you to my fellow speakers and to the audience members. So, so this is clearly a very broad question. So I think maybe the best approach is for us to sort of attempt to break it down into sub-questions. So one way to think about this is, so one common way to construe the task of philosophy is to think of it as aiming at clarifying our conceptions such that we attain clarity about the natures of the questions that we are posing. So on this view of philosophy, philosophy does not really aim directly at solving, if you like, substantive questions. Rather, it aims at recasting our questions and definitions in such a way that we can then go on to solve them using other, perhaps other disciplinary tools or orientation. The question that we are posing today, and sort of the overarching theme of my talk, is what can philosophy do for African development? The first thing to note is that philosophy can help us understand exactly what do we mean when we speak about development in this context, human development. Do we mean economic growth, better healthcare? Do we mean increased knowledge production of a certain kind of knowledge, so namely modern scientific knowledge? Do we mean the transformation of African societies into more just societies or into freer societies? Now, frequently what people are referring to when they say that they want development, they are referring to a bundle of such factors. Of course, people give different weight to different elements in this bundle, and we can think of political and social conflicts as also in part the result of these different axiological judgments about the different values that we are going to assign to these different factors. Now, in my talk, I wish to explain how African philosophy can help us talk about one facet of this problem, namely about knowledge production in a clearer way, especially in relation to issues of development. It's clear, I would say, that one of the key factors which contributes to global political, social, and economic inequality is the lack of adequate scientific and technological resources in the global south in general, but specifically also on the African continent. And we have a recent example of this. So the saliency of this issue has been amplified during the COVID-19 pandemic, which showed that the lack of autonomous, effective scientific research institutions, along with manufacturing capacities in many countries on the African continent, rendered them totally dependent on the global north. For example, the COVID pandemic made it clear that most African healthcare systems are heavily dependent on imported vaccine. If we look at it in terms of statistics, African countries have to import about 99% of the vaccines that they employ. The entire continent only has 10 manufacturers, of which only 5 can manufacture the substances out of which the vaccines are made. And these 5 plants are located in Senegal, South Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt. The rest of the plants are what are called finishing plants. The result of this lack of scientific, technological, and industrial capacity is that by April 21st of 2021, so well into the pandemic, 87% of global vaccine stocks had gone into high-income countries. And the poorest countries, especially the poorest African countries, had to wait their turn. Now, in this moment of crisis, it has become clear that dependency on the goodwill of the global north is utterly irrational in the long run and hurts the prospects of African development. Yet the question of modern science and its place raises problems about how we define modern science, as well as questions pertaining to the relationship between modern science and indigenous knowledge, or to use the expression of the Beninois philosopher Ponahontonji, endogenous knowledge, if we prefer that term. Moreover, there is a prevalent notion to the effect that European colonialism introduced modern science and technology to the African continent. This prevalent notion is then used to make certain claims about the relationship between modern science and coloniality, to use some of the contemporary parlance. Anxieties are raised about whether the adoption and further institutionalization of modern science and technology involves some sort of acquiescence to the colonial project. Now, in this talk, my aim is to really show how African philosophy can dispel such anxieties, and I wish to focus on Ponahontonji's distinction between modern science and Western science, because those two things are frequently conflated. So I don't know if I should stop here, because what I plan to say has more relation to the second question, and I don't think we posed the second question.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. Let me quickly go to Mr. Akinpelu before we go to the second question. That was a fantastic one from you. Mr. Akinpelu, your question, the first question is, it says, what is the nexus between investigative and data journalism? What is the nexus between investigative and data journalism? You have the floor now.
All right. Good day, everyone. It's a great privilege to speak about this passionate topic, and it's basically, just to put it simply, investigative journalism is journalism itself. It's according to a school of thought, is reporting what others do not want reported. So, and that could range from just telling people stories to writing about certain historical events or anything else that people should know about. So now when we now begin to infuse it, we now begin to relate that to investigative journalism. It's about digging deeper, just not talking about on the surface appearance of whatever it is that is being discussed. It's a way of delivering powerful stories that has impact, but that have impact on the society. And the sole objective is to exposing the truth. That's all. So predominantly when you use powerful storytelling style to expose abuse of power in government, corporate corruption, and even social injustice. that is an integral form of communication that relates uncomfortable yet vital truth to the public while putting pressure on people in power. So when I begin to talk about how this relate with data, because when you are investigating or you're digging deeper into certain occurrence, what you basically are doing is just to mirror what the evidences you have out there to show what the facts are, to show what the truth is. But then with data in the mix, it's just about what people are saying with what trends over the years has shown. If, for instance, someone says more Nigerians are leaving the country, why are they leaving the country? Oh, it's because of they are looking for greener pasture, they are in search of a better pay and whatnot. But then with data, you can establish how the trend has moved over the years. What is it showing? How many people are going where? What percentage of Nigerian migrants are going to a particular country? Like, for instance, the United Kingdom's immigration office recently released a data saying, apart from Indians, Nigerians and Philippines are the highest number of skilled worker migrants that are moving into the UK, even more than European migrants. So this ordinarily within a Nigerian space, there's always this discussion about people wanting to japa. That's like the local lingo, which is mean migrate. But then as an investigative journalist, what you could do is to firstly say, okay, what is the reason for which people are traveling here and how are they leaving the country? For what reason are they doing this? But if you just stop there, if you do not put it into perspective by showing this is the number, this is the trend of people leaving the country, this is what the data really shows. So in essence, is the nexus between investigative journalism and data journalism is not just showing what people are saying, but also showing trends over the year, using data, using information, using statistics to back whatever it is that people are saying or whatever it is that is public knowledge. If it's basically on, and that aside too, you could also do it well by showing, visualizing what people are saying, the story you are telling. At times people may not be willing to read so many long pieces of text or watch long hours of long minutes of videos, but if you could visualize a single concept in just a chart where people who are just maybe they do not want to read as much, they will be able to see, oh, this is what you're saying, this is what the trend has shown. It shows that in 2020 this is the number of people that left Nigeria. In 2021 this is the number it reduced due to COVID. Those sort of things are things that will be put into perspective using data journalism. So it's a way of making people understand the truth and making them telling stories using evidence-based model to tell stories. And the sole aim of this is not just to expose abuse of power in government or corporate corruption in the private sector, but also to expose social injustice and to tell the truth. That's basically what.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yusuf Akinpelu. That was the question on what's the nexus between investigative and data journalism. On my side, the first question on my slide is uprisings in Africa. Where is knowledge in the equation? Uprisings in Africa. Where is the knowledge in the equation? I will not bother us with rhetorics of how uprisings, protests, riots are coming up here and there, because we know in a situation or in an environment where things are not done properly, we are meant to experience such situation. Like Adam Branch and Zechariah Mampuli in their books titled African Uprising, Popular Protests and Political Change, highlighted 105 protests between year 2005 and 2014 in 40 out of the 54 countries of the continent. As of today, the figure has risen and become a regular occurrence. These protests are broadly regarded as neoliberalism. Valerie and Alessandra and Alice reported that the latest protest started in the late 2000s and spiked dramatically from 2010 to date. From the more recently Uganda's Walk to Work protest, Ethiopia's Ethiopia's crisis against the regime of Meles Zenawi that led to several deaths, the regular student activist revolts in Sudan, the South African large-scale and persistent unrest on campuses across the country that was dubbed the colonization of universities, the protests break out in Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, and Zimbabwe, which literally are, those areas are immune to protests owing to the tightly controlled nature of public space, and to Nigeria, the Nigeria's Occupy movement against the former president, Jonathan. And most recently, the youth-centric EndSARS that happened in 2020 that led to loss of lives and wanton destruction of properties. Popular uprisings take different forms, varied in scales, and occur at local and national levels. However, it is noteworthy to know that all the shades and forms of protest in Africa share common objective, that is seated implosion and frustration with the socio-economic and political situations. Where does knowledge come into the equation of repetitive errors across the continent? To what extent are these uprisings provide solution to the protesting countries? What are the knowledge gaps in the ideologies and movements that refuse to produce the desired socio-political changes in the continent? For instance, before the Nigerian 2020 EndSARS protest that led to several deaths and destructions, similar protests over police brutality, extortion, corruption, and impunity had happened in Chad, Kenya, Senegal, Uganda, and South Africa. Now the question is it that member countries do not compare knowledgeable and intelligent notes at the African Union meetings? What has happened? What is missing? What do they share? What kind of knowledge do they share? If we have had police extortion, brutality, and all sorts from like 4 to 5 African countries, why do we have to wait? Where's the knowledge? Why do we have to wait until EndSARS started and led to several loss of lives? This is where I'll stop on my first question. Then I'll go back to Mr. Zayed el Nabolsy and I'll put up the second question that says, what is the relationship between certain modes of knowledge production and question of cultural identity? Mr. Zayed, I take that again. What is the relationship between certain modes of knowledge production and questions of cultural identity? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you to my fellow panelists for these very interesting discussions. So I wish to again approach this question about whether modern science is the same thing as Western science. So in the way that many people speak, they're often spoken of as if they were the same. Now I wish to present an alternative view, and here this view is drawing on the work of Paulin Hontonji, who I mentioned earlier. Now Hontonji identifies the rise of modern science with the rise of Galilean science. He particularly emphasizes the importance of the descriptions of structures in nature in mathematical terms. And I mean, this is interesting because we already have a talk about the importance of quantification. However, he does not think that it is reasonable to infer from this fact that modern science is somehow Western in any essential sense. As he puts it, the fact that Galileo was Italian or European or Westerner doesn't matter much except for the ideologues of Western imaginary superiority. Now, he emphasizes that to think of modern science as in any sense essentially Western is to neglect the fact that all cultures are the products of their interactions with other cultures. So we also should add that Hontonji's own sort of theoretical commitment to historical materialism leads him to recognize that the study of the rise of modern science should be contextualized in relation to the rise of the modern capitalist world system in the 17th century onwards, which means that it depended on material processes and exchanges that can't by any means be described as solely Western. Now, if historical materialism as a framework for historical explanation implies that the scientific revolution should be understood in relation to the development of productive forces and the rise of capitalism in general, then this negates the possibility of explaining it in culturalist terms. And by this, I mean appealing to a kind of self-contained trans-historical cultural entity such as the West and its innovative spirit or something of that sort. Now, I borrow the concept of culturalism from the Egyptian political economist Samir Amin, who was based for a very large part in his life in Dakar, in Senegal. Now, according to Amin, culturalism is based on the hypothesis that there are cultural invariants able to persist through and beyond possible transformations in economic, social, and political systems. On this view, then cultural specificity becomes the main driving force of inevitably quite different historical trajectories. Now, it's very interesting to look at what critics of Han Tongji have written about him. So some people accuse him of, and this I'm quoting from one of his critics, of servile imitation of the West. But this seems to me to miss the central point. We must recognize that claiming that, for example, early modern physics was first developed in Europe is not by itself a Eurocentric or a racist assertion. Eurocentrism and racism come into play when we attempt to explain this fact by resorting to explanations in terms of racial characteristics or innate spiritual or intellectual characteristics that Europeans are purportedly held to exclusively possess. Or by attempting to argue that somehow the fact that some European thinkers in the early modern period developed what we think of as Galilean mechanics entitles all Europeans living today, none of whom had anything to do with this specific intellectual development, and few of whom actually understand it, to think of themselves as superior to other peoples. Now, Antonji's point is that the normative and axiological weight which is placed on priority disputes is fundamentally misplaced. I think this is a very important lesson for the way we think about modern science on the African continent today. Moreover, while Antonji is not as explicit as he could be about this, it seems that for him the fundamental distinction is not really between Western science and non-Western science, but rather between modern science and pre-modern science. And one way to think about this is to think about debates about the history of Chinese science. And of course, the most famous scholar of this in English is Joseph Needham, who wrote a lot about the history of Chinese science. And Antonji engages with this work. And again, there are lessons to be derived here from Antonji's engagement with debates about the history of Chinese science. Lessons in particular about understanding African contemporary realities through comparative analysis that takes the African continent as a part of world history, just as any other places is a part of world history. So in relation to this point, according to Hontonji writes, according to Needham, until the 17th century, at least Chinese science was considerably more advanced than Western science and technology. And for him here, Western only has a geographical reference, that's all. What happened then in the 16th and 17th century? The new development is Galileo's science. Thus, it is not that the rest of the world didn't possess anything that we call science prior to the 17th century, it's just that it wasn't modern science. Now, modern science is characterized, according to Antonji, by an underlying hypothesis, namely that reality could be hypothetically structured as a mathematical model. And one way to think about what somebody like Galileo did, well, this approach was already adopted in European astronomy and actually most astronomical discourses around the world. What Galileo did was sort of expand the scope of application of this approach to include terrestrial phenomenon or sublunar phenomenon, to put it in the terms of the time. So maybe I should stop here because I don't want to take too much time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was on the second question of Mr. Zayed that says, what is the relationship between certain modes of knowledge production and questions of cultural identity I'll go on to you, Mr. Yusuf Akinpelu. The second question says, where are we on the African scene as far as investigative journalism and data is concerned? Where are we on the African scene? Over to you. I think you need to unmute your mic. Kindly unmute your mic, please. Okay, you can start again.
It's often said that a democracy is as good as its press. So because Africa is a fledgling democracy or in a growing democracy, or most African countries have relatively new democracies. So also is their press trying to build its momentum on how to ensure that they play the role of the fourth estate of the realm. And that's one thing to say, that Africa's investigative journalism scene may not be where it ought to be, but it is not where it usually was. And this as how to know this is true is, for instance, we've had instances where African journalism platforms have been able to investigate and detect some wrongdoing in government, abuse of power by government, detection of corporate corruption, and likewise they've also ensured that they've demanded justice for some persons who have been unjustly treated. And that's why we have different kind of platforms that are amplifying some of the works of journalists. Like we have African Investigative Journalism Conference, which will be in its 18th edition this year. It's usually holds in Johannesburg, South Africa. So some of these things are what brings about development into how Africans, or how often Africans, or how Africans amplify the voice of their works. It's some of the gains African journalists have been able to achieve is not just their eminent presence in different awards and also panels and also even boards across board. So it's just to show that Africa's investigative journalism scene is a growing one. The singular fact that many governments in different parts of Africa are now very much aware of how much of power the African press wields. They've been able to sit up. Like for instance, in a country like Kenya that recently had its presidential elections, in the past it's often shrouded in secrecy, but the pressure from African press, Kenyan press, has ensured that, for instance, the electoral body has been able to open up its counting process. Of course, this is in collaboration with CSOs, another international organization, but if the press didn't import all of these things, it might have not had prominent presence in the African scene. So these are some of the things that we could see that Africans have been able to do, African investigative journalism scene have been able to do. Okay, back home here in Nigeria too, we've had instances where, for instance, a minister forged certificates and she continued to be a minister despite forging the certificate, one of which qualifies her for that position. We've had investigative journalists here in Africa detecting why and how this was gotten and why it matters and why she should not be holding that position, which eventually she resigned from. And these are some of the plus and some of the gains Africa as Africa's investigative journalism scene has developed. On the data side, we may not be exactly, I cannot exactly say it's where it ought to be, but then there is also a growing number of awareness about data journalism across Africa. Now we've had different media organizations setting up a data desk and ensuring that they help people understand data better than they usually did. And that aside, we've also had some CSOs or some non-for-government organizations as well taking up some data policies or data journalism role as part of their mandate to ensure that they help citizens understand what data is, For instance, you could take a budget of a country, for instance, and you may not be able to understand what exactly is it the country is spending what for. But with this desk and with this effort by different African startups, not just in the media space, but also in the corporate world, where people are able to ensure that the citizen can understand what ordinary data means and why they should care about how their finances are being spent and for what their taxes are spent for. So it's a fledgling one, and it can only get better.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yusuf Akinpelu. It's a fledgling one, and it can only get better. Going to my own second question that says, Nigeria's past and present uprisings, knowledge gap, and the missing link. I'll try to go through the protest uprisings and the likes that we've gone through in the last few, maybe pre-independence, like according to Kesari and 2021, which presented a shocking result on social violence involving military groups in Nigeria. The two authors gathered that in 2021, organized political violence involving military groups increased by 50%. The statistics shows a high fatality caused by military groups than Boko Haram. We recorded over 3,600 protests, riots, violence, explosions, and battles in Nigeria. What still is predicted that 2022 looms with threats of more violent situations in the country. Violent acts ranging from the Creek of Niger Delta coast to Boko Haram menace to the Sahara north of Nigeria to the separatist Eastern youth and the Bring Yoruba Nation agitation in southwest region of Nigeria. There are touches of violence and different forms of uprising across the country. Esther, trying to get the history of where we're coming from, Esther John identified 7 uprisings in Nigeria in the past, namely, let me say the celebrated ones: the Kano riot of 1953, Aba Women's riot of 1925-30, Abeokuta Women's revolt of 1947, Ali Must Go protest of 1978, Anti-SARP riot of 1989 under Babangida, and June 12 riot 1993, with the occupied Nigeria of 2012. But in 2020, the Nigerian youth staged an unprecedented nationwide uprising that threatened the Nigerian government. The EndSARS protest was strictly youth affair, which transcended cultural, educational, and economic status. The uprising attracted global attention and marked an indelible event in the history of contemporary Nigeria. However, most uprising often fails. It usually failed attempts to change the system. Here is the poser. Do Nigerian youth who seem to be warming up for more uprising understand the reality of the facts? Do they have the requisite knowledge to see all this agitation, protest, uprising through to desirable success? Now, let me quickly just run through the major items on my topic. The choice of Amnesia, Anamnesis, and Nemesis in the title of this paper has major implications. With the resting youth clamoring for uprising and revolt by day, it is pertinent to have a careful introspection on their motives, goals, and tactics. How well do the youth remember the similar past events and learn from the mistakes of the past? An attempt at violent development of such magnitude requires a subtle and intellectual analysis. Hence, the choice of psychological terms like amnesia, Anamnesis, and Nemesis, a poorly conceived uprising by the Nigerian youth will exacerbate the deteriorating situation, if you agree with me. And this was clearly evident in the last EndSARS protest. While amnesia means the loss of memories, such as facts, information, and experience, Anamnesis is the direct opposite. It is the ability to recall past events. While Nemesis may have diverse interpretations, The most common meaning is that Nemesis is something very difficult to defeat. It is also commonly interpreted as a punishment or defeat that is deserved. The last term shows a bleak future for agitators of any sort in the country. This dialectical approach is beyond a mere figurative conjugation. The true nature of the uprising must be fully understood before the Nigerian youth take any further step in such direction. Now, let's look at knowledge here. For the purpose of this presentation, let's define knowledge as facts, information, and skills acquired through experience or education, both theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. That's according to Oxford Language Dictionary. I'll take that again. Emphasis on facts, information, skills acquired through experience or education, both the theoretical and practical understanding of a subject. Now, we can classify like 4 typology as far as this kind of knowledge is concerned: the factual knowledge, the conceptual knowledge, the procedural knowledge, and metacognitive knowledge. I wouldn't want to bother us with that academic exercise, but let's look at this critically. Why has the uprising failed or repeated itself in Nigeria? The past protests, why have they failed? The one that succeeded, why are they repeating themselves again? We need to ask ourselves. And the first point I want to raise is it that people lack the requisite knowledge to embark on a protest and push it through, or they have inadequate knowledge of what has happened in the past or what they want to embark upon. And the third one is it that they have a colorized knowledge? Is their knowledge colorized by politics? Is their knowledge colorized by ethnicity? Is their knowledge colorized by religiosity? Is their knowledge colorized by all other intervening variables? But 2 dynamism must be brought out of this. The first one that we must understand very clearly is the fact that political elites, they have the knowledge, power, and the willingness on the part of, that is, the knowledge, power, and the willingness on the part of the government to engage, dialogue, and enact reforms to address grievances. They know what to do. The political elites, they know what to do. But the problem is that knowledge, power, or the willingness on their part to engage the protesters, to involve dialogue, and enact reforms to address the grievances. Why on the part of the protesters? The problem, the challenge we are having is that they embark on the drive to change the people and regime without systemic changes and sustainability of protest or agitation. We change government today, we all protested, we change Jonathan, we enthrone Buhari. What has happened from fire pan to fire? I think we need to concentrate our energy. We need to understand, we need to have the knowledge of the fact that we have to have gone beyond or past changing regime, changing individuals, but enthroning changes that will better the lot of Nigerians. I'll stop here and allow Mr. Zayed to take his third question. Thank you for your attention. Hello, sir, are you there?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Your third question says, how can the study of the history and philosophy of science from an African perspective inform our attitude towards modern science? I'll take that again. How can the study of the history and philosophy of science from an African perspective inform our attitude towards modern science? You have the floor now, sir.
Thank you very much. So I'll take up the thread of my talk. Now I've sort of been trying to argue, drawing heavily from Haunton G's work, that there is something deeply incoherent about trying to think of origin, the point of geographical, historical origin of modern science as essential to the definition of modern science. The fact that modern science emerged in Europe doesn't make modern science an essentially European value or anything of this sort. The key point is really that questions of origin are irrelevant for determining claims to ownership, if you like. The criterion for ownership, and I'm just using this word as what sociologists sometimes call an actors category, a word that people use, a category that people use. Since many people seem to speak as if the West has a claim to ownership over modern science. Rather, what is decisive is the question of mastery, one's ability to assimilate modern science and be an active participant in the debates which shape its various fields. What is needed in Africa today, as Antonji puts it, is not just to apply traditional know-how in agriculture, for example, he gives this example, while continuing at the same time to import from the West, whether in agriculture or in other fields, technologies which are poorly understood by local users. What is needed instead is to help people and their elites master and capitalize on the existing knowledge. This is necessary whether the knowledge is indigenous or not. Thus, what is really at stake here is the development of an autonomous modern scientific discourse on the African continent. And the achievement of such an autonomous scientific discourse does, in fact, presuppose the critical appropriation of indigenous knowledge. Which involves a kind of synthesis between existing knowledge systems and modern science. This is why somebody like Antonji, for example, stays away from using terms like traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge. For the adjective traditional has historically functioned to dehistoricize indigenous systems of knowledge by depicting them as static. While the term indigenous has connotations of purely local applicability. It precludes what it describes from making claims to universal validity. So with someone like Antonji, the term that is used instead is endogenous because it refers to origins without forfeiting the possibility of integrating external influences and mastering them. Now, I think Antonji's definition of endogenous knowledge is very interesting. So here is the definition. One will therefore describe as endogenous in a given cultural setup such knowledge as is experienced by society as an integral part of its heritage, in contrast to exogenous knowledge, which is perceived at this stage at least as an element of another value system. Now, what's really interesting is that the emphasis in this definition is not on origins per se. Instead, the emphasis is clearly on autonomy and mastery and the overcoming of alienation, hence the emphasis on how that knowledge is experienced by a given society. This alienation itself is also maintained through the extroverted nature of modern scientific discourse on the African continent, namely that it's directed outwards. And one concrete way to understand this is to think about the way in which collaborative projects, for instance, tend to receive most of their funding from the West, and the sort of projects that are researched, the topics are often dictated by the people who provide funding, clearly enough, of course. Now, for Antonji, overcoming this alienation requires the integration of the two bodies of knowledge, and it requires testing for the truth of the claims that are made by indigenous healers and so on. So this approach is quite different from the approaches of at least some of the ethnosciences, which do not seek to test for the validity of the systems of knowledge that they describe. Yet I'd contend that respect for indigenous knowledge requires that one investigate its truth value and not simply seek to defend it without qualification, for this would amount to a patronizing attitude towards it. And one last thing, perhaps I'll give some historical example from my own research, specifically on Africanus Horton, mid-19th century physician and anatomist from Sierra Leone. So with Horton, we see that Horton is living during a period where scientific racism is on the rise. Yet Horton is a trained anatomist and a trained physician, and one of the things that he's able to do is to draw on his knowledge of anatomy in order to refute the scientific racism which was taking shape in Victorian Britain at the time. Now, this case is interesting because it can be understood in terms of this emphasis on mastery rather than point of genesis as being the key criterion of ownership over modern science. In this case, a very specific form of modern science, namely modern anatomy. Now, modern anatomy, of course, did not originate in Sierra Leone, but somebody like Horton was able to master it and claim ownership of it, and to use it to criticize the proponents of scientific racism for essentially engaging in some form of pseudoscience. And the text where Horton does this is, excuse me. So Horton does this in 1868 in his West African Countries and Peoples, which is published in 1868, which is available in the public domain. I would encourage people to of course, read it and check it out for themselves. So this is just one example to illustrate concretely my point about the question of mastery rather than point of origin being the decisive factor when it comes to thinking about modern science and who owns it and so on. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much. I believe you are muted.
Sorry. I want to say thank you very much, Mr. Zayed. Before you take I'll still come back to you to have your parting shot, and I will please enjoy you to come online so that we can have the last everybody on video for the last part of the whole thing. So you prepare for your parting shot for your topic. That was a presentation on the third question of Mr. Zayed that says, how can the study of the history and philosophy of science from an African perspective inform our attitude towards modern science? It's a very interesting area to discuss, but we're going to come back to that. I'll come to you now, Mr. Akinpelu. The third question says, where do we head from here? Where do we go from here? Now, we've spoken about the nexus between investigative and data journalism. We've spoken about where are we on the African scene. Now, where do we go from here? Over to
you. Where we go from here is just to basically improve on the kind of journalism we practice. We strive towards ensuring ethical journalism. We strive towards ensuring that we continue to push out content that instill confidence in the minds of the people. Because whatever it is journalists are churning out, it's the people that consume whatever it is you publish. And if there is no trust, it would often, no matter the amount of effort being put into it, it would often be seen from the point of view of skepticism. So as the next step for investigative journalism in Africa is to continue to ensure they improve their expertise and continue to acquire skills to tell more stories, and not just to tell these stories, but to tell it in the 21st century way. It's not enough to just have thousands of words of investigative piece. If you could tell it in a different way, where people will consume it better and more. So for you to know different styles of telling stories, different mode of sharing those stories to reach the needed audience, learning how to ensure that this is done is one way we have to go. And aside this is also to hold the investigative journalism scene to continue to hold itself accountable among themselves firstly. Then we can then begin also to talk about ensuring that we hold the government itself accountable. So it's a moving train. It's something that the investigative journalism scene itself, I mean, the practitioners themselves need to continue to strive towards. It will not happen within a day. It would continue to happen, and also to continue to advocate for laws that makes practice of journalism more easier on the African scene, and to continue to push back at any form of oppressive laws that might have been proposed by different governments, like we have in Nigeria, for instance, where we have the media regulation bill and a couple of others, so that's trying to give the government some level of leverage in determining what journalists can do, what they can report and what not. So also do we have in different other African countries. So the investigative journalists and journalists as a whole must continue to push back at these oppressive regimes and ensure that they fight to ensure that they deliver quality content and give their audiences the best they deserve. You are mute.
Don't mind me. Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Akinpelu. That was the last part of his question that says, where do we head from here? I haven't heard about the nexus between investigative and data journalism. Where are we on the African scene? Then the last one, where do we head from here? All right, thank you very much. I'll also come back to you for your parting shot. We're going to round off in another few minutes, okay? But before then, let me just tell you the third part of mine. Presentation that says knowledge, protest votes in 2023, and recruitment error. Knowledge, protest votes in 2023, and recruitment error. Yeah, you agree with me that whatever happens to Nigeria as a nation, we spill over to every part of the continent. As it stands today, Nigeria is already battling lots of issues, agitation, protests here and there. Even while we are pretending to be containing them, we know that the MSAS of 2020 is still there, staring us in the face. We are also aware that the Yoruba agitation for secession is still there. And just yesterday, the ROH said they have written to President requesting to leave, not to be part of the country again. And we may try to think that they are being silenced, but the reality is the fact that they are still there, existing, trying to strategize. We also are aware of the IPOB, and we know that the situation of IPOB has snowballed into a terrible situation, whereby it is affecting the security of lives and property in that part of the country. We are still battling with that, just one country. And at the same time, Boko Haram is still there. Boko Haram is still there, as the military claims to subdue the leadership. That leadership keeps rising every day. We still battling that too. At the same vein, we still have other militants from Niger Delta. They call themselves Niger Delta Avengers. Just a few days back, less than 24 hours, some of them came up to support some candidates. Some of them came up to protest the contract award given to Polo to secure the pipelines. Some of them are coming from the people to complain. Now the point is this: the aftermath of the MSAS has galvanized another direction to protest, and it has taken the fight from being physical, from being on the street, to the voters card. The Nigerian youth are coming up to say, okay, we're going to change this government come 2023. We're going to tell you that we are 60% of the voting capacity. We're going to tell you that we have the power. But the question is, how knowledgeable are they to understand that changing the personality, changing the party, changing individual will not change the country? How knowledgeable are they about the constitution of the country that is defected? How much do they know that the constitution allows for a governor of a state to go hand in cap every month to Abuja to collect money and spend the way he wants to spend it? How much do they know that the 50% of the roads network belong to local governments? Primary health care belongs to local governments. primary education belongs to local government, and the governors are taking over the responsibilities of the local government chairman. How much do you know that everything in the constitution is upside down? How much do you know that this kind of constitution cannot give us the desired kind of government or governance that we need to prosper, to lead to economic prosperity? In the same vein, how much knowledge of the electoral law do they have? Do they understand that the candidate that wins a region of the country and refuses to win 35% of others cannot be declared as a winner? Do they understand that all these things go beyond parochial sentiment, beyond ethnic sentiment, beyond religious sentiment? Do they have the knowledge that hero worshipping cannot give us the needed leadership that we require in this country? Do they understand that the parasocial effects, the one-way affection they have for different individual or political party, will not give us the kind of leadership or the government of the country we need? All this knowledge they must understand. And I'll put it this way, that if they think already they are supporting that the only way they could show the country or the political elite that they are in charge, they are in power, is to have their voters card and pick one of the candidates, support such, and enthrone the person, then we are far from reality. Because if Angel is brought to Nigeria with the framework of constitution that we have at the moment, nothing different can happen. You would agree with me that in the last few years, different succeeding governments have been performing poorer. It's like the whole thing is nose diving. We complained about Obasanjo privatizing all we had, especially the power, and he left. Yar'Adua came, couldn't do much then. Jonathan came on board. We protested in 2012. Eventually, we removed Jonathan. What has changed? We have enthroned Buhari. What has changed? It simply means the systemic problem must be addressed, and not about changing. You must have that knowledge. The youth must have that knowledge to understand that it goes beyond changing individuals. It goes beyond changing regime. It goes beyond queuing behind individual or party. The instrumentality of office must be put in place and right. And I'll conclude on this note before my parting shot to say, protest or uprising should not be seen as means to change the regime, but a process to press for reform and challenge state's monopoly of political discourse and actions. Regime change won't lead to systemic change, not in Nigeria. I'll take that again. Regime change won't lead to systemic change, at least not in Nigeria. Thank you very much. I'll come to Mr. Zayed. Coming back to your topic, I want you to give us your parting shots. What do you have to tell Africans on your topic? And haven't summarized everything on what, just in few words, like 1 or 2 statements. What do you have to? What is your parting shot on the philosophy and human development, the African context? Over to you, Mr. Zayed. I would love you to come on online, please, if you don't mind. You can just be video, just few seconds. We are done. We are going already.
Yeah. Can you see me?
No, I can't see you yet.
You can see me because I have my camera on. I don't know. It may be because of my internet is not so powerful. Let me turn off my camera. Okay. I have my camera on, so maybe it will come on. So in terms of parting words, well, what I'd wish to say is that there is a very rich intellectual tradition of African philosophy that reflects on issues of human development, reflects on the place of modern science in African societies, reflects on the relationship between modern science and cultural identity. And I would also just wish to emphasize that this idea that it was colonialism that brought modern science to the African continent is entirely false on empirical grounds. This is why I think it's also very interesting and important to study the history of science on the African continent during the 19th century before the scramble for Africa. So I give the example of Africanus Horton from Sierra Leone. So I think that's very important, because otherwise we get a very distorted image of the history of science on the African continent, which then in turn leads to certain anxieties at the political and social level about the place of modern science in African societies. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zayed. Can we have your parting words, Mr. Yusuf Akinpelu?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you once again. It's for us to just continue to strive harder, to continue to tell African stories, to continue to hold people in power accountable, and to continue to tell stories within the African reality, to continue to strive harder to make the voices of people who ordinarily wouldn't have been heard, continue to let them be heard by telling their stories, by showing the world that truly this is what Africa is about. Africa is not a world of savagery. Africa is a huge, Africa is a continent with huge potentials, with huge human resources, and by doing this, not only would we be projecting African realities, likewise we'll also be ensuring that we let people have maybe somewhat different opinion about who Africans are. And this can only be done by a very good and well-informed journalism processes. And that is done by using very good, ethical, and robust investigative journalism techniques. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Yusuf Akinpelu. On my part, I want to believe that whatever happens to Nigeria come 2023, we affect the whole of Africa. And it is very instructive to note that the way the system is structured, changing the regime, changing the party, changing the individual will not give us the kind of Nigeria that we want. At the end of the day, we may have Nigeria without Nigerians, and I'll make bold to say that at this moment of our lives, what we need now is not election. We need to go back to drawing board and redesign our constitution. We need to go back to drawing board and make sure we have system that works. On that note, I want to say thank you very much for your attention. On behalf of Alafarika, I want to say a big thank you to Mr. Zayed el Nabolsy, who has spoken extensively on philosophy and human development, the African context, on this online African symposium titled Knowledge, Creation and Dissemination in Africa. Same goes to Mr. Yusuf Akinpelu. We appreciate you so much. Mr. Akinpelu has spoken on investigative and data journalism, unraveling the landmines for Africa's knowledge-driven prosperity. On my side, Anu Adesemoye, I've spoken on Amnesia, Anamnesis, and Nemesis of Uprisings without a requisite knowledge in Africa, in Nigerian experience respectively. Once again, I want to say thank you very much. We will continue to contribute our parts to the development of Africa. We love Africa. We're not going anywhere. It's a continent. We ensure that we develop our continent with all necessary knowledge. Once again, thank you very much. Bye-bye. Mr. Zayed, bye-bye.